Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to join the webinar on supporting the human rights of migrant sex workers. So we are so excited. We have more than 250 people join all over Canada and in the world. But unfortunately, we only have 100 people can sign at the same time. So that we would like to encourage if you are logging in with your colleague next to your table and in the same organization, maybe you can share the computer so that to provide other people can log in together. So, and I think there are some people still logging in, but I would like to use this time to introduce the trainer today. So I'm one of the trainer. My name is Elene Lam. So I'm the executive director of Butterfly, which is an Asian and migrant sex worker support network. So, and then Vincent Wong is the staff lawyer of the Chinese Southeast Legal Clinic. So that we will talk about this migrant sex worker issue today. Okay, so that let's Vince to talk about the instruction of how to engage this webinar.
Okay, thank you very much, Elene. I'll just do the boring part of kind of ground rules and instructions before we really get started with the substantive portion of our presentation. And so basically, as Elene said, we have a large number of people who have registered. This particular webinar, it goes maximum of 100. So once we get to the 100 mark, we may be reaching capacity. But in any case, please, if you have questions or comments, please have them written and use the questions box on your dashboard. So there, in your dashboard, there should be a little tab that says questions, and you can send the questions to us. Unless it is really kind of urgent, we probably will answer all the questions at the end. And unfortunately, if you have a particular troubleshooting matter, because there's like probably be around 100 attendees, we're not able to help with that live. But if there are general issues like, for instance, the volume is too low or it's too high, please let us know and we'll adjust. The other thing is that you will not be needing your mics to participate in this presentation. Again, if you have questions, comments, answers to our questions, please put them in the questions box. Another thing is that the PowerPoint slides that you see during the presentation will be sent out to you afterwards, but they can also be accessed during this presentation in the handouts tab of the control panel. And afterwards, after the webinar, you'll receive an email with a short feedback survey. Please fill that out. The feedback is extremely important as we go forward to try to improve future services. So thank you so much, and let's get started.
Okay, so this is a training about migrant sex workers, so that the voices and story of the migrant sex worker is very important. So because all our work and also our training actually is informed from the experience of the migrant sex worker. So, and they are the members of Butterfly, which is the Asian and Migrant Sex Worker Support Network, in the last few years, so that they have used different opportunities to share the voice, particularly with the problem with the law enforcement, so that now we are trying to show some of the voices from the migrant sex workers so that you can know actually what they think and what is their story. So migrant sex worker is like everyone, right? So that they have like the work, and so that they may have different feeling about their work, and so that you see the slides, some of their sharing, so that some of them may think just sex work is just like other work, but some they think this is more fulfilling the other work. And some may see that sex work actually is the resistance of different kind of oppression. So for example, transphobia, exclusion and discrimination. So, and then, so in, so you may receive the attachment from, like, this is a funny story, so that actually we have uploaded this information so that you can download it to see it. So Fanny's story is very important because that is demonstrate the experience how she is encounter with the law enforcement, particularly now have so many money go to anti-trafficking investigation, because all the people think that, oh, it's good, the money go to anti-trafficking is going to help and rescue the people. But in opposite from the migrant sex worker experience is totally different. It's what happened to Fanny. So she has a tourist visa, she worked in hotel. But during this anti-trafficking investigation, the police identify her in the internet and pretend the client and come to her place. So after she was asked whether she is being controlled, whether she has a boss, and when she say no, so the police check her passport and call the immigration CBSA so to arrest her. And she was detained and deported because she worked illegally in Canada. It is only one of the example of 23 people being deported in last 2 years from the member of Butterfly. And so other than Fanny's story, so that I would also like to show like the Cookie story. So because many people don't know actually how traumatic the experience encounter with the law enforcement. So after they arrest, some of them will be detained, even they are the identified suspect of victim trafficking. Sometimes they may also being detained. So this is the stories shared by Cookies of her feeling experience. Many of them is being handcrafted, and so that she was brought to the ante room, and she was detained more than 35 days, and she was being strip searched, and so that and whole process is very inhumanized. So it's very insulting, and also this is also happened to many of our members, and some of them even want to kill themselves because of the detention. They don't get translation, they can't get any support, and they don't know how long they can be detained, because immigration detention can have like no fixed date how long you stay there. Yeah. So as the story show that like immigration is one of the issues they are facing when they work in Canada, but migrant sex worker is also facing the problem with the criminal law. So Nikki's story is demonstrate how complicated what they are working. So and complicated when they face the law enforcement. So Nikki become homeless after she run away from the abusive husband, and she moved with a friend Lucy. So both of them are migrant sex worker. And one day Nikki was robbed and assaulted by the perpetrator, and the neighbor here, she was screaming and called the police because they were concerned she was being trafficked, because now you see there is a lot of advertisement and promotion from the government that how we need to aware the trafficking issue. But many people, they will see that if you have neighbor is a sex worker, they may think that, oh, you're a criminal or traffic victim. So but the police is not come to help her. The police arrived, actually not allowed her to leave, and called CBSA. Finally, she was being arrested and lost her status. And then so that she and this is also showing that how dangerous when the sex worker, when they face the violence, when they contact the law enforcement, they maybe get into the trouble. But not only her, because she worked with Lucy. Lucy is working with her. She was being also suspected as a trafficker. So because she helped Nikki to advertise and also help her to transfer money to back home. So this is always happen because there is a lot of criminal law regulating sex work, and also because of sex work is being seen as trafficking, so that is also this criminal law is also imposing and against sex worker community. So now we have started almost 10 minutes, so that I hope that if you have time, so that we have some material on the website we will show later, so that you can go to read more story about the sex worker. I think that is very, very important. We are not understanding law, we are not using the law, but we need to know about what is happened to the people and how we can use the law to protect the people. So what is the purpose of our training? So that how all of us can have deeper understanding about the complexity of diversity of the migrant sex worker realities. Because what we see in the media or what we see in the report may not be so same as what we encounter directly with the migrant sex worker. So that is very important to know about the their complexity. And the other thing is understand the legal issue faced by the migrant sex worker, especially intersection of the criminal law and also immigration's law. So many people think that, oh, the law, more law is better, protect more people. But actually, sometimes we find that existing law and law enforcement actually affects the migrant sex worker negatively, so that they are not helping them, but is harming them, hurting them. So, and the third thing is I think it's the purpose. I saw the why you want to join the training. Most of them is most of you is said that you want to better equip to inform, to support and protect and the migrant sex worker. But I think it's also very important how you can be more actively being creatively defend the human rights of the migrant sex workers. So that is our purpose, so that I hope all of you will enjoy this training, and at the end of the training you can know about more information about that. Okay, so when we talk about migrant sex workers, so that we need to know who are the migrant sex workers. So, and from this picture, you can see migrant sex workers are everywhere, and most of the sex worker actually is migrant sex worker globally. So, migrant sex worker is the sex worker, they travel from one place to other place, so that they have diverse race, class, gender, immigration status. But it's very clear that the social circumstances is affects the working condition, and also their immigration is also affects their right. So that whether make them more curious, and the immigration status can change quickly. So Vince will talk about more the immigration impact later on. So, and for the sex work, it's not only use sex service to exchange for money, but some people also use it to exchange for food, accommodation, or status, or even safety. And so you may also see some sex workers, they may or may not identify their sex worker. Some of them may identify they are stripper, or they are the people work in massage, or they don't like to identify themselves. But we use migrant sex worker because I think it's important to recognize sex work is work, and also for our communication we will use the term migrant sex worker. So, and sex worker, many people are very curious why they do this job. It's like all of us, some do this because of they need basic need, some they do it of self-actualization, and some they may do it for resist of oppression, especially the racialized migrant people. They may face a lot of like oppression, they cannot find a job easily, or they have like domestic violence. So sex work actually create other option for them. For some people that may be the best option, but some people may be the only option. So that is the situation is very diverse, different. So what is the common issue faced by the migrant sex worker? I think it's like many racialized migrant people. So language barrier, social isolation is the issue, and racism, racial profiling, because I think especially the law and law enforcement have a lot of power, so that they are always being targeted. And the discrimination of sex work and criminalization is also make them, it's difficult to reach out to other people or let other people to know about their work, and also even with them friends or family. So it's very difficult, make them isolated. And the other part is what we focus more is the conflict with the laws and law enforcement, because there is a lot of different laws around migrant sex workers. They may make them become more vulnerable. So and many people also concerned about violence, and then they're saying, oh, sex work is always related to violence, but we find that the violence actually is related to the working conditions. So for example, the sex worker, higher class, they work in expensive hotels, so that the experience may be very different with the sex worker. They don't have document work underground. So, but I think we need to pay attention is we don't call the client as the perpetrator, because the people come to pay the money is the client, but the people rob or hurt the sex worker, they are the perpetrator. And the other thing is we also need to concern is from many research is also so that law enforcement actually is one of the main source of the violence against sex workers, so that they are facing the surveillance, arrest, detain, and deportation. And during the investigation, also there is a lot of police going on. So we have women working massage parlor. The police is ordering to dance in front of them, and also we have women experience the illegal strip search, and also we have the people money being taken away by the police officer, or being requested to have the free sex service. So that's only thing. The law enforcement is the hero trying to save the woman, so that maybe we also need to understand how complicated and the bad experience with many sex workers with law enforcement, that you may understand why they don't trust the law enforcement. And the other part is the sex worker agency is not always being respected and recognized, because they are assumed they are traffic victim, or sometimes I always being asked a question, so when the victim, they don't know they're victim, what we can do, right? But I think when we ask this question, then we have already a lot of assumption that the people don't have capacity or ability to make decision about themselves. But I think that is also very problematic, and we need to reflect on that. No matter what limit option people they have, but they still do the decision about the life, right? But in the process, they may face a lot of problem, challenge, exploitation, but how they handle it. But we should not only assume they don't have capacity to agree what they are doing. And so what I explained before, so that you will understand, we have done a consultation, and a lot of service provider is interested. Oh, they don't disclose their identity to me. How I can identify the migrant sex worker? Why they don't trust me, so that why they always lie to me. But as you understand the complexity of their experience and the risks they are facing with law enforcement, then you will understand why they don't feel safe and comfortable to disclose their identity and information. So, and then I think some of you may join this training because you're concerned about trafficking, but I think that is very important to recognize and understand that sex work is not human trafficking, and sex work are not victims, because the conflation of human trafficking with sex work is extremely harmful to migrant sex workers. So it do not only increase the law enforcement and also trying to put the people in the box, right? Is always in our experience is like whether this is victim or not. If she's victim, I can provide support. If they're not victim, we cannot provide any support. That is also very problematic, because even people don't identify they are the victim, they still have a lot of need. They have a lot of issue that you may do. But if you just have those narrow perspectives, so that will limit what you can do. And also the other thing is mistakenly to recognize sex work as trafficking and third party as the trafficker. So because migrant sex workers are always isolated, as we say, sometimes they need to work together so that they can support themselves. You may help your friend to translate, help them to send money home, or to access service, or do advertisement. But all is become criminalized, and the people involved is being seen as traffickers. So, and sometimes we also see the people, if they have boyfriend or girlfriend, knows they do this job, we also automatically assume they are the trafficker without understand the complexity of the spouse relationship. So, and I think that is very important. We need to understand, so that we have more explanation in our reading, so that you can read more about that later. So, and because of the assumption sex work is traffic victim, especially migrant sex workers, so that they are often being targeted on surveillance and rape, and a lot of law and policy is developed from this idea. So the victim label denies the decision autonomy and agency of the sex work. So that's why it's always saying that, oh, they cannot protect themselves. We need some law or policy or law enforcement to rescue them. But that is very problematic. As we explained before, they have a lot of problem with the law enforcement already. If you have more law imposing, it's not helpful. Sometimes it's like more harmful. So that, and then this idea and also this kind of policy and intervention also obstruct the sex worker from access the labor and social support and protect them from other kind of violence, because you assume sex work is violence already, so that you don't see when they experience the real violence, because you can't differentiate, because you're just concerned they are the victim of violence, but when they experience other violence, they don't care. So, for example, we have a woman being murdered in Toronto. We're trying to reach the police, but they said, this is not traffic victim. I cannot do anything. So all the resources, money go to anti-trafficking, but there is a lot of other issues actually need to handle, but they don't get any support. So that is very complicated, right? It seems to, but in simple is people think that law system and law enforcement is very helpful to protect the people. It may be sometimes, but we also need to recognize the law and law enforcement can be the tools of oppression at the same time. For the migrant sex worker, they are facing the municipal, immigration, and criminal laws together, so that the conflation make them always have different kind of challenge, no matter what kind of immigration status they are facing. So, for example, the municipal law in Toronto and other cities, so that they sometimes you can see the proposal because of the concern of anti-trafficking. They would like to change the municipal law to protect the people better. However, what happened is they are using this tool against sex work. So, for example, the city of Toronto, they now have to do a report about the body rob, so that they think the body rob is highly related to the sex trafficking, so that they're trying to have like more regulation. 400 massage parlor have been like investigated more than 2,000 times compared with so many restaurants. They don't have so much surveillance. Now they are also trying to change more law, make that the impact is a lot of people working massage parlor may lost their license, so that they cannot work legally anymore. So that push them like more easy to be exploited. So for the criminal and immigration laws, the story of Fanny and Nikki, so they have shown you about what is the impact. But the rate in the massage parlor and also sex work place make them cannot protect themselves because they need to push underground. And we have a case, migrant sex worker is being found suspect as a traffic victim, but she was being detained and she's not able to get bail because all the client, all the men she know is assumed as the client, they are the criminal, and all the girls she know, woman she know is suspect as a trafficker working with her, so that she's not allowed to get bail. And during her detention, after she arrested, she had like $10,000 being taken away by the police, and her phone is being seized because they are seen as the crime matter, so crime evidence, so she cannot access like all her property and information, and that is the experience. You see the impact on the rate, and that make the sex worker is try to avoid contact with law enforcement and sometimes also with the service provider, because they don't know whether the service provider will share the information with the CBSA or immigration officer. We also have some experience, the settlement workers, they don't know the risk, so that when the CBSA asks the information, they disclose some information, maybe negatively affect the sex worker. So that when we know there is so many laws, so that we know that sex work is being pushed underground and increase their vulnerability and exploitation. So, and also make them not able to get the labor protection and health and safety protection. And also, I think many people join the webinar today is how to assess the service. So when you understand the complexity and the challenge and the risk what they are facing, so that you will understand why there is so difficult, they assess the service and assess them the safety measure and work together and also assess the justice. And it's also very important for us to understand the impact of the law enforcement, not assume not all the law enforcement is protecting the sex worker, but is maybe very harmful for them. So I will let Vince to describe more, but before that we will have a case illustration. It's more funny, right? Not only talk about the dry law, but we would like to know actually what happened.
And also thank you everybody. Keep the questions coming in, and we'll do our best to address all the questions at the end with Q&A.
Yeah. So this is a case study. So that's from a real life story too. So Miu overstayed in Canada because she was her refugee application was being rejected, and after that she worked with her friend Tiffany apartment as an employee. And Miu helped Tiffany to advertise on the website, and Tiffany is responsible to receive the money from the client and store the money for Miu in order to avoid robbery. So Miu was being sexually assaulted by a perpetrator last week, and she was afraid to continue to work. And Miu also found out Tiffany spent all her money and do not intend to pay her back. So that if you're a service provider, what you can do. So we will encourage you to write your answer in the question box so that what you can do to support Miu if Miu come to you. So, and I would like to let Vince to talk about the law. So and then we will come back to the case to how we can do something for Miu.
Sure. So, Elene, did you want me to go into an explanation of the laws first, or should we try to engage with case studies? So, okay. We'll come back to Miu's case study, but if you have the handouts, you can download the handouts to take a look at Miu's case study, and just walk us through your thoughts. What's the best way? What are some thoughts that we can support Miu? And then when I go through all the laws, we'll come back and we'll explore it all together. So thank you very much. So I'm going to go into a little bit more detail as how criminal laws, immigration laws affect migrant sex workers and their interactions with law enforcement in general, and just how they do business and live their lives. Another large area of law that affects all migrant sex workers is also municipal law, but there are very many different types of municipalities or municipal laws, and unfortunately we don't have the time to cover all of that, but just to put that in your head, and we'll mainly focus on criminal and immigration laws, as that affects all migrant sex workers roughly the same in terms of the types of law. So let's talk about the criminal code provisions. The governing statute for most criminal provisions that affect sex workers is the Protection of Communities and Persons that have been Exploited Act, PCEPA. And this was passed after the seminal Supreme Court case of Bedford. In 2013, I believe the decision was issued, and which basically said that, like a bunch of laws that govern and regulate criminalize sex work are unconstitutional, and they violate sex workers' charter rights. So in response to this, the conservative government at the time put together another set of laws, this PCEPA, that still criminalize sex work, but in different ways. And that's the current governing statute. So when we look at who is criminalized with what provisions, at a high level, it's all clients. So immediately, if you have a sex work transaction, that transaction is a criminal transaction, because all clients, by attempting to purchase or purchasing or attempting to purchase sex work, are caught under Criminal Code 286.1. All third parties are also criminalized through the next three provisions, which are receiving a material benefit from sex work, procuring sex work and sex workers, and also advertising sex workers or advertising on behalf of sex workers. So it's also relevant that these third party people are captured by these offenses. Those criminal offenses do not require exploitation. So that's not a necessary element to prove in these criminal laws. So when we talk about third parties, however, it's clear that the lawmakers had in mind already a certain third party, right? I mean, that's the stereotypical idea of a pimp, or somebody who controls and exploits sex workers in a very visceral way. But the realities of the situation on the ground is that third party can be anybody involved with sex workers. So a sex worker, third parties can include other sex workers that help each other in various ways. They work together. Maybe they help screen each other. Maybe they help drive each other. It could be managers, agents, webmasters, accountants. It could really be anybody who is involved, which is very obvious if you think about sex work as just kind of any other business, right? Anything that is involved in that business could potentially be caught by these third-party offenses. And criminal code, it's often said that, well, this doesn't criminalize sex workers, but actually sex workers are also directly targeted by criminal code provision 213, which essentially criminalizes any kind of sex work advertising in public spaces. So that's how they're directly affected, and how they're indirectly affected through the entire scheme. And also of note is the human trafficking offenses that can also, when employed kind of improperly, cover sex workers, cover third parties. And again, especially if you're using that kind of anti-trafficking victim oppressor framework, and you're already looking for that without fully trying to understand the complexity of the realities on the ground. It's also, you can see how these criminal code provisions, even if we're not able to get all of them to stick in terms of prosecution, they can be used as the pretense to do raids on places where sex workers work. So even if we wouldn't be able to ding them on the criminal law provisions, if they have precarious immigration status, we can easily hold them and get CBSA to then prosecute them on the immigration angle. So that's a way in which raids can often lead to arrest, detention of, and deportation of migrant sex workers. So the next one I'm going to talk about are how immigration laws affect migrant sex workers. There's a quick question, will the slides be able for download also? Yes, they will be sent out afterwards, and they're also actually part of the handouts, I believe, which if you take a look at your little control panel tab, there's a handout, and you can download them immediately right now while you're following along. Immigration laws, so if you take a look at this, immigration status can be fluid and changing, and I like using this little triangle or pyramid thing to illustrate a hierarchy of vulnerability in terms of status. And that makes you vulnerable in relation to law enforcement, right? So at the top, the most secure are Canadian citizens. If you have the full citizenship, then only the criminal laws affect you as a sex worker. But generally speaking, the other immigration stuff doesn't affect you. Let's go one step down. For permanent residents, a lot of people think, oh, I have permanent status, I'm pretty good. But if you remember the last slide, we have all these sorts of criminal laws that affect migrant sex workers, and there's also in the Immigration Refugee Protection Act criminal admissibility provisions. So basically, it says people that have been convicted of certain offenses will then have their PR stripped, and then they can be deported. So the big one here is anything that has a maximum, any provision that has a maximum of 10 years can be used to strip your permanent residency. And this includes, for instance, the material benefit provision has a maximum of 10 years. The procurement provision has a maximum of 14 years. So all of these things can be used to essentially strip permanent residency and get a migrant sex worker deported. Temporary status is the next level, and that's very precarious because even if you have a work permit, now all work permits, and we'll see from the next slide, but all work permits and temporary residents are not allowed, explicitly not allowed to engage in any kind of sex work or work in the erotic industry. So what that means is if law enforcement catches up to you and you have anything but PR or citizenship, you're automatically offside of the immigration law, and then that's automatically a grounds in order to deport you. So, and then non-status, I think, is pretty obvious. They're at risk at any point in time for arrest, deportation, and arrest, detention, and deportation. So you can see why in any of these cases, other than perhaps citizenship, any migrant sex worker with precarious immigration status will be, by definition, wary of law enforcement and especially CBSA. And this is a little bit, I'm not going to go into it, but there's two particular provisions in the Immigration Refugee Protection Regulations, which specifically prohibit temporary residents and people with work permits from legally working in sex work and in the erotic industry. And I mentioned the criminal admissibility provisions earlier. So perhaps we can go back to Mew. What do you think, Elene?
Yes, sure. So that's what will be the legal and non-legal measures that can support Mew.
And this is not, of course, limited to the criminal and immigration stuff that we just talked about. But let's see what we can get. Let's see what we have here. And maybe I'll start off with some of the comments that we've gotten from our audience. So supporting Mew. Let's see here. So contact Butterfly to request mediation. Well, hold on. Before we can get into the comments, let's maybe even try to break down and identify what she might be facing. So Mew overstayed in Canada, and after her refugee application was rejected. So clearly it seems like we might be facing a non-status situation.
Yeah.
So
and I think some people, they think that when the refugee application rejected, it's done, right? But actually, no, there is also other possibility. Go to legal clinic, right?
Right.
So that,
or even the refugee application might not be on its last legs yet. There still might be a chance for appeal, or there might be a chance for judicial review. Maybe that avenue isn't dead yet. But even if it is dead, maybe there is other ways in which a Mew can regularize her immigration status. But non-immigration status or some sort of precarious status. What do you think about this, Elene? So she's working at her friend Tiffany's apartment as an employee.
And it's very clear, so that Tiffany, you don't pay her, right? So this is a very clear workers' issue. But because if we just use a trafficking land, immediately think that, there is a pimp controlling, get the money, is going to criminal procedures that may not Mew want, right? Because when you're involved in criminal procedures, so that the impact and the risks will be very high, right? But that's maybe potentially is the employment issue. So because the labor issue, so that is many different ways is also possibility, right? To find some people to help mediate is the option. And also workers organization. I saw some people write down, contact the workers organization, that may be the possibility. And also whether I see the question, whether we can assess the employment ESA, right?
Right.
Okay.
So, I mean, the other thing is that you can make the argument, of course, that by the employer, Tiffany in this case, not paying Mew unpaid wages, hey, that's exploitation. And I think there is an argument to say that's exploitation. But when you analyze it from a labor framework, all of a sudden, you have, we've worked with migrant workers before, right? So you have a sense of how that works. And you find that, well, if I approach it from an anti-human trafficking only perspective, as soon as I hear exploitation, maybe I think, maybe I need to call police, I need to call CBSA, they've got to come help. But in this case, it's very possible that Mew could be negatively affected here, right? So let's take a look at some of these questions. So responses. Thank you so much for the responses, by the way. Contact Butterfly to request mediations, perhaps on the unpaid wages issue. We've also, exactly. So we've another one we talk about is Mew was sexually assaulted. So she was actually sexually assaulted by a client, perpetrator. So great. Answer from Aaron Burke here. Encourage Mew to go to a sexual assault center and a legal center workers action center. I think that's an amazing response. So, sorry, you want to follow up on that?
Yeah, and I think that is very, very important because when we see these questions, we always very quickly jump to the answer, right? But I think it's very fundamental. We need to know two things. One is what Miu wants, right?
Right.
Sometimes it's like, well, oh, we are hearing this story is so overwhelming, but maybe at this moment she just need a place to stay one night, right? Or she want to handle what issue? Does she want to get better salary, or she want to handle the experience of sexual assault, right? But sometimes because our assumption limit what we can see, right? So I think it's very good that important we see different issue here. So potentially she may need support, but I think it's very important we need to communicate with Miu to understand what she wants. But we also need to bear in mind, because of the risks, Miu may not want to disclose everything to you at the very beginning, right? So that how to leave the place for the people so that to disclose their identity more safely, so that helping the anonymous and confidential service is very important, so that the people feel free to share. So, and if you can't offer this kind of service, how you tell them your limit, right? So that the people can know about how much information I disclose to you, you may disclose to other people. But the communication with Miu is very important. But because now a lot of social service sector is so divided, right? You may only offer one kind of service that may be limit the length what you can ask or you want to know. But if we can have like broader understanding and trying to give more room for the people to share, so that they can tell you actually what she wants. And the other side is the risk, right? Potential risk, what risk she have. So for example, some people suggest you may call law enforcement, but the law enforcement, her non-status issue may be exposed, so that maybe also put her in the dangers, right? And some people may think that this may be potential exploitation, that is traffic victim. So there is like temporary TRP,
Yes.
temporary resident permit may be helpful, but you also need to realize it's not give you a permanent residency, right? Just give you half year to stay here, but your application may be rejected. For some people, if they reject, they may be also deported, right? So that what kind of risk she's facing, and what does she want, and what is different issue. And I like a lot of answer, because they are trying to mobilize different kind of social service sector, no matter labor or service provision, to support mute.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to. There's so many great comments. We're not going to have time to go through all of them, but I want to go through, some themes. Some awesome themes from Caden, from Robert, I mean, basically the idea of the importance of talking to that person and asking them what they want, right? You try to provide information, but ask them for what they want, to get their consent as to exactly what they want to do. Because it's totally possible, for instance, so Miu was a victim of sexual assault from a perpetrator, that she wants revenge after this guy. So she wants justice for that thing. So she may want a criminal response. What she needs in that case is to make sure that she knows all of the information relevant to calling the police, right? Maybe she may not know. And if she's okay with that, then again, what are her options? It doesn't necessarily block out law enforcement as an option, but you have to know all the risks and try your very best as a service provider to make sure that person has all the information and risks and pros and cons that they need to make a reasonable decision. That decision is still their decision.
Yeah. And sometimes the service provider may say that, maybe sometimes the client is very difficult to start. They don't know how to tell you what they want, right? So, but we don't assume they don't want, but how we can provide different information, your experience or knowledge that may be helpful. So, for example, you can tell them there is access without fear policy in some cities. So if you go to like complain to the police or other like access other like kind of service, you don't need to disclose your immigration status, right? And as Vin said, what will be the potential risk for other people, the knowledge you have, right? So then what will be the potential risk, what will be the potential resources, that if you can tell them more so that they can have better ideas, so that can tell you more clearly what they want. Because I think it's when they do not answer your question what they want, doesn't mean they don't know what they want, but they may not feel safe, or they may not able to articulate to make you understand what they want, right? So that's the communication is very important. Yeah.
And just amazing comments from Gitanjali Lena, about the importance of anonymity for the supports, right? Since we know that law enforcement, police, and CBSA will want to inquire into immigration, that puts her at great risk. So, any of the supports that we're talking about, and there's some great ideas: sexual assault centers, workers action centers, like housing supports. We have to make sure that those supports follow an access without fear policy, right? To make sure that they're not going to ask, for instance, for immigration status before they access it, and also won't contact CBSA after the fact, to make sure that they're safe services for migrants like me.
Yeah, and also we need to aware about, like, some organizations, they may have obligations so that their case file or intake form may be called, to be used by law enforcement. And sometimes we heard that some law enforcement, they may also call the service provider to get the information, and you always need to know that you should not disclose it to any, like, law enforcement. That's because that may be very harmful, even you think it's helpful, right? So, for example, a law enforcement want to get better whether she's exploited, but in the dialogue you may expose she's working in sex work, so that it's make them illegal, breach the work permit, so that is very dangerous too. Yeah.
Some questions about resources. We'll have some resources to be able to share at the end of the slide, and also we'll be able to share them with you all by email after the fact. But I think the purpose of this issue wasn't necessarily to come up with the right answer, but to show, and you've got, I think the comments have been amazing, the complexity of this issue, which is not even an atypical issue, right? It shows you really how crazy complex both the laws that could have faced and both the kind of situations that migrant sex workers will bump into, and the complexity and nuance of the legal support or the non-legal supports as well that we could give in this case. It's tricky, but by kind of unpacking those different elements for criminal employment, immigration, we have a better, you get to a better answer. You get to a more informed answer, both for the client and the service provider as well.
To sum up, is like how to know what the client wants, and the other know all the potential risks. And I see a very good comment, because sometimes their policy, like censoring city, they may not implement, right? So that we know that there's policy somewhere, but
you can't assume.
You don't assume, and you need to know actually how it's enforced, right? So because of the time, so we may skip these two slides. You can have a look. So there is like more detailed information in our like whole training material package. So, but as some of the participants said, that confidential and anonymous is very, very important, and how to make them to be safe to access your service, and to know about the impact, and how to be creative, right? So that to know different new initiative, what kind of law you can bring in, or what kind of other community resources you can create. And the other thing is, because a lot of organizations limited by the funding organization, right? But how you push the boundary. So even you may get the anti-trafficking funding, but how you can be like flexible to make the people even not trafficking, not victim of trafficking, still can access your service and support. They don't need to identify themselves, right?
Another one is many organizations have their funding, severely restricted to, for instance, people with permanent resident status, right? And while that creates challenges, it doesn't necessarily mean that no services at all can be provided, right? Again, be creative, be flexible, and push the boundaries really of what you think is possible and what can be done in your organization.
Yeah. And I think you need to know about the service well before you do the referral. So because your referral may be not safe, and then it's also make those worker don't want to get any help anymore, right? So then we can talk about, it's very important, we are talking about rights, not rescue, how you can have different resources, support to make the people have more power, more right. So instead of waiting somebody to rescue them, so that they can use their resources and rights to better protect themselves, at better negotiation or better work at working situation, or in different contexts. Yeah. So, and we would like to talk about how you can support migrant sex workers. understand the realities of the migrant sex worker, the complexity, right? And how you can be creative to create a confidential and anonymous service and collaborate with different organizations, sex worker rights organizations, for example, Butterfly, and be the good allies and centering the sex worker voices and leadership, because we should not assume sex worker is no brain. We should not assume they don't have their agency, but how we can have the dialogue, to understand what is happening to them.
And again, the sex workers, they're the experts, right? Yeah. And it's important to note, especially, we're doing this training with some like the experts. We're not the experts, right? All of the expertise, all of the knowledge have come directly from the migrant sex worker communities that we're working with. And that knowledge should bleed into your understanding and, challenging your assumptions about sex workers and how to be a proper ally, right, to center the sex worker voices. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. So that respect the self-determination of an agency of migrant sex worker. So, and very important, differentiate sex work and human trafficking. Right. Remember, sex work is not trafficking, because when you only think this way, you will limit yourself what you can do, and also and reinforce this problematic discourse, to encourage the very harmful policy, so that how we can stop. And not only about it, help us to spread this message.
Yeah, I think there's quite a few comments about the difficulties in differentiating between sex work and human trafficking and how to unpack that. And I think, obviously this is debated in many different circles, and we don't purport to have the answer. But what I found is helpful as a conceptual tool is understanding a spectrum of you could say labor exploitation, right? You could say that at the absolute end spectrum of labor exploitation is like slavery, right? So that's it could be slavery, picking agriculture work. It could be in factories. It could also be sex work, right? And if it's completely forcibly done, then that's the absolute end of the most extreme end of labor exploitation. Yeah. And then between that, there's all sorts of situations, right? Most situations are gray situations where there's certain type of labor or a certain type of exploitation going on. Well, does it rise to human trafficking? And here's the problem, right? When you only think, oh, is this human trafficking? Yes or no? You're limiting yourself to only perhaps that really end part of exploitation that in your mind looks like something, right? Yeah. It looks like, maybe like harboring 20 workers in a car, or it looks like a pimp relationship. But the realities are so much more diverse, and which is why we definitely say sex work in the sense that it's consensual, it's done as actual work, is not human trafficking. And if there's one thing we want people to take from this is the importance of not automatically conflating that.
Because I think because of the lens, right? So like a lot of labor issue, if the boss don't pay money or not working hour, we'll see is the labor exploitation. But it's happened to sex work, we immediately think about is sex trafficking, right? But if we only like grouping everything to be the sex trafficking, actually we don't see actually what happened, right? What actually happened to that person, whether there is some relationship problem, where there is like some employment problem, or whether there is like the violence happening. But if we don't use this term, we try to understand the complexity of this issue so that we can find more way to address the issue that the people are facing. And the other very important is how to fight against the discrimination of sex work, but also to support the decriminalization of sex work. As we said, there is a lot of criminal law actually make sex work more vulnerable, and now the language is changed. Before, the people saying that sex work is bad, so that we criminalize sex industry, but now we are using the protect victim, but actually the law is still same. Vince have very good explanation of all the sex worker potentially can be also like charged, right? And how to fight the struggle of migrant justice, anti-racism, and also how to fight more support resources for the migrants and criminalized community. And the other thing is not we only help this community, but how to create a space. Actually, migrant sex workers, they know about themselves, they're the expert, they have a lot of resources, but all the law make them cannot use their resources to defend their rights and protect themselves. But how we can take away this obstacle, so support the movement. So, and also important to reflect our own bias, right? Why we see the sex work is so different with other industry, right? Why we think it's not comfortable when someone tell you they are the sex worker. So that is a very rooted, we cannot cover here, but how we may have more discussion in the future. And very important to help to share this message to other people, so that we will upload the webinar later and we will send you the link. It would be great if you can help to spread the message.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it's just so interesting and so important to see the linkages of why migrant justice, anti-racism, gender discrimination especially, are linked to creating the circumstances in which people can be exploited, wherever you are on that kind of exploitation spectrum. Those are the root causes of it. And we have to understand how that works, and also how those situations are informed and interact with law enforcement, right? Why people have trouble on the ground really actually dealing with law enforcement when law enforcement is used as just a solution, the first solution to solving these really, really complicated problems.
Okay. So that rights not rescue. So that butterfly, if you have like any issues, so that about migrant sex worker, you can contact us. So because of the time, we would like to go to the resources. So actually from the link at the bottom, you can see there is a whole bunch of training materials related to each section, because today we only have 1 hour. So just a summary of everything if you want to go to more detail. And I think it's very important to know about how different area the law is affecting the migrant sex worker, and so the life experience, so that you can access different training material. And this training material is developed with Tara. She is also the trainer in October, so that we are doing the summary of what we have done before. Okay, so, and we don't have a lot of time, but I think we still may have 3 minutes. Q&A, quick question. Yeah. Anyone want to ask any questions?
There's a great question here from Caden Penny. How would you support trans migrant sex workers with the added layer of transphobia at play?
So I think that it's a very good question, because as Finn said, right, so that the people being marginalized is because of the gender, the race is one of the issue, and transphobic also make a lot of people, they limit their opportunity to work, and sex work is, for some people, is a powerful resistance, and so that you may not difficult to find a lot of like sex worker or sex worker group. They also have like member is like from trans community, so that you can see the relationship, right? So, yeah.
How about this one from Kat Tai Tam? Can I ask which languages would be most relevant with sex workers and I guess migrant sex workers currently?
I think it's very diverse, because they are very diverse. So because we are Asian sex workers, so that organization, so that we speak more Asian like country, but it's like French, and also I think it's very diverse. Like you can ask OCASI, different language, immigrant with status, without status, yeah.
Some interesting comments we're getting in here on the trans sex worker point. Gitanjali says, help trans sex workers get any kind of ID. Trans ID clinics can help trans sex workers get ID. Another comment, sex work is one of the few gender affirming work options available to trans women, which is very much seen in practice, but maybe not commonly known as that work could be in itself for some people a way of fighting back against oppression and achieving economic independence. Another comment here, Pace Society also helps trans and non-binary people change their ID.
But I think from this point, you see sex work actually is intersect with different identity, right? So that is like migrant, race, gender, and sometimes the challenge is because of the moral idea of the organization or particular service provider, or some people, they are being excluded from access those services, right? So some sex workers, they may not feel safe or comfortable to come to the LGBT community because they are afraid they are being discriminated. Same as the sex worker, when they go to shelter, they also will worry other people how to see them. Even the sex service provider may think that, oh, you're the trafficker, come to the shelter to do recruitment. So that how we make our different service accessible, because the sex worker is having different identity, and your support is very, very important. Yeah.
If there's one thing, we're running out of time here, so we got to wrap it up. But in terms of looking at the resources, if there's kind of one thing you probably want to start with as a service provider, is probably part 1, which is kind of our summary guide for all service providers, and it's a really good starting place. Another great starting place is the Q&A.
Yeah.
But if you want to go nitty gritty into some of these the laws that affect migrant sex workers, use part 2, kind of those specific law-specific guides.
And part 3 is more accessible, simple language for migrant sex workers, so that you can use it for the community members. So that if you want hard copy, you can email us so that we can send you the copy.
Okay. And I know there's a bunch of outstanding questions. Perhaps we'll have them.
We hope that we can organize a training again, right?
Yeah. So really sorry, we don't have time to answer all of these questions, but we'll try to. Oh, sorry.
The last page.
Last page
yes,
here.
So,
okay, great.
Yeah.
So contact Elene Lam if you have any outstanding questions, which I'm sure you do, because unfortunately we're just not able to answer all of them in the time frame we're short on time.
Thank you for your support, because I think it's very important. We have so many people join this training, because this is very important. Your participation can change the migrant sex worker justice. You are not only doing the service to the sex worker, but you are advocating the justice to the migrant sex workers. Thank you for all the contributors and partner organization, and also thank you for your support to migrant sex worker justice.
All right. Thank you so much, and thank you for taking your lunch time and sharing it with us. And we hope to see you and talk to you all soon.
Thank you. Take care.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
take care. Bye-bye.